My name is Martha Johnson. I'm 68 years old, and I need to tell you something that changed everything I believed about justice, love, and whether the truth really does set you free. 15 years ago, my daughter-in-law walked out. She left her 3-year-old son, my grandson, with nothing but a cold note on the kitchen counter. His name is Elijah. He was autistic, nonverbal, and she couldn't handle it. Those were her words. I can't handle this. So I raised him, alone, for 15 years. I worked double shifts as a nurse. I sat through countless therapy sessions. I learned to read his silences, to understand his hand movements when words wouldn't come. I fought with schools that wanted to put him in special classrooms. I believed in him when nobody else did. And then something extraordinary happened. By the time Elijah turned 23, he had built an app called EchoMind. It uses artificial intelligence to help autistic children communicate. A major tech company bought it for $10 million. $10 million. My grandson, the one everyone said would never succeed, would never amount to anything, had just changed the lives of thousands of children he'd never even meet. I remember sitting at our kitchen table the night he signed that contract. I cried so hard I could barely see. Not because of the money, because I finally understood that all those sleepless nights, all that faith when everything looked hopeless, it had meant something. But here's where the story takes a turn. 6 months later, there was a knock on our door. It was a Sunday morning. I was making breakfast. I opened that door, and there she was, Trina, his mother, the woman who had abandoned him. She looked different, prettier, richer. She was wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly rent, and she had this smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Trina," she said sweetly, "I heard my son did very well for himself." Behind her stood a man in an expensive suit, a lawyer. That's when my stomach dropped. Within a week, we received court papers. She was suing for custody rights and claiming she deserved a portion of Elijah's money. Her lawyer argued that she'd been a victim of circumstance, that she'd always loved her son, that she had a legal right to his earnings as his biological mother. Our lawyer looked at me across his desk and said words I'll never forget. "Martha, we might lose this one. If she can convince the judge that you manipulated or isolated her from Elijah, we could lose a significant portion of his assets. She's playing dirty, and she has a skilled team." I felt like the ground had opened beneath me. That night, I sat on Elijah's bed, terrified. I told him everything. I apologized for not protecting him better from her, even after all these years. He looked at me with those calm, focused eyes, the eyes that had watched the world so carefully for so long. And he whispered something that made me pause. "Grandma," he said quietly, "just let her talk. She'll bury herself." I had no idea what he meant, but I was about to find out. If you loved this story, and I really hope you did, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Also, download your ebook titled Suspense and Thriller Stories by clicking the link in the pinned comment below. It's free, and it's full of stories just like this one. Let me take you back to where it all started, to a time when I still believed that love could fix anything. It was 2008. I was living in a small town just outside Atlanta, working at Grady Memorial Hospital. 30 years I'd been a nurse by then. I'd held dying hands, delivered babies, comforted families on their worst days. I thought I understood suffering. I thought I understood resilience, but I didn't understand my own son at all. Darren was 25 when he met Trina at a church cookout. I remember that day because I remember thinking something was off about her from the moment she walked into our yard. She had this energy, not warm, not kind, but loud, always loud, laughing at jokes nobody made, touching people's arms to keep their attention on her, asking questions about herself disguised as conversation. She was pretty, I'll give her that. Long hair, confident walk, the kind of girl who made men forget to think straight. And my son, he forgot to think straight immediately. Darren was good. He really was. He worked as an IT technician, made decent money, had a gentle way about him. He helped his friends move, fixed his neighbors' computers for free, called me every Sunday without fail. He deserved someone who would build a life with him, not someone who wanted to be built around. But love doesn't ask questions. It just shows up and takes over. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within 2 years, they were married. And within 3 years, Elijah was born. I'll never forget the first time I held him. He was so calm, so quiet. Most babies cry, you know. They demand attention, scream their lungs out because they're terrified of this new world. But Elijah, he just looked at things. Walls, ceiling fans, his own hands. He'd stare at them like they were the most fascinating objects in existence. He's so well behaved, people would say at church. But by age 2, something wasn't connecting. He wasn't pointing at things to show us what he saw. He didn't babble like other toddlers. He didn't seem interested in playing with other children. By age 3, we knew. I remember the pediatrician's office. Trina was sitting there with her arms crossed, leg bouncing impatiently. Dr. Catterson was gentle when she said the words. Elijah shows significant markers of autism spectrum disorder. He'll need early intervention, speech therapy, possibly occupational therapy. But with proper support, many children... Trina stood up before she finished. He's autistic? She interrupted, her voice sharp. He has autism, yes. We'll need to... I need some air, Trina said. And she walked out of that room without looking at Elijah once. That was the moment. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything broke. The diagnosis terrified her. I could see it, even though she tried to hide it behind anger and irritation. She stopped coming to his therapy sessions. She'd make excuses. I have a migraine. My friend needs me. I just can't do this today, Martha. I can't do this. Meanwhile, I was the one sitting in those waiting rooms. I was the one learning how to help him regulate when loud noises overwhelmed him. I was the one reading every article I could find, asking questions, staying up late trying to understand how his mind worked. Darren tried to keep the peace. He'd come home from work and try to talk to Trina, try to make her understand that Elijah was still their son, that autism wasn't a punishment or a personal failure. But she just shut down. She'd go out with her friends, stay late, come home with that same distant look in her eyes. I remember one Sunday dinner. Trina sat across from Elijah while I was frying chicken. He was spinning a toy car wheel, completely absorbed in the motion. She stared at him with this expression I can only describe as resentment. Martha, she said coldly, he doesn't even look at me. What's wrong with him? Darren dropped his fork. What's wrong with him? Nothing. Nothing is wrong with our son. Then why won't he act normal? The words hung there like poison. I watched Darren's jaw tighten, watched him try to find words that would make her understand. But there were no words. There never are, when someone has already decided they don't want to love. That night I held Elijah on my lap in the living room. He rocked gently, the way he always did, finding comfort in rhythm. I kissed the top of his head and whispered, "You're perfect. You're absolutely perfect." I didn't know I was promising him something I might not be able to keep, but I meant every word. The end came quietly. No screaming arguments, no dramatic confrontation, just a slow fade, like a light being dimmed by someone who couldn't be bothered to turn it off properly. Trina stopped pretending after about a year. The distance became visible, tangible. She'd sit in the same room as Elijah but look through him like he was furniture. Darren would try to engage her, invite her to his therapy sessions, show her progress, Look, Elijah said a new word today. Look, he made eye contact for 5 seconds. But she just shook her head and left the room. By the time Elijah was 5, I was doing most of the parenting. I'd pick him up from school. I'd work with his speech therapist. I'd sit on the floor with him, teaching him to match colors and shapes, celebrating every small victory like he'd just won an Olympic medal. Darren was torn in half, trying to be the husband Trina wanted and the father Elijah needed. You can't do both. Eventually, he stopped trying to balance and just stood still, caught in the middle, failing everyone. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd worked the night shift and had just gotten home around 7. Elijah was still asleep. Darren was in the kitchen looking like someone had drained all the blood from his body. "She's gone," he whispered. I thought he meant she'd stepped out, maybe to the store. "She left, Mom. She packed a bag. She left a note." The note was on the kitchen table. I can still see it, the handwriting neat and careful, almost mocking in its composure. "I can't live like this. I need a life that makes sense. Don't come looking for me. T." That was it. No explanation, no regret, no mention of her son's name. Darren tried to call her. The phone went to voicemail. He texted. No response. Within a week, he found out she'd blocked his number. I remember standing in his doorway that first night after she left. He was sitting on the bed, staring at nothing. "How do I tell him?" he asked me. "How do I explain that his mother doesn't want to be his mother anymore?" "You don't," I said. "You just love him harder." But loving him harder wasn't enough. Darren was devastated, and devastation is a luxury we couldn't afford. He had to work. He had to keep the house running. He had to pretend, for Elijah's sake, that everything was normal. Except it wasn't. And I watched my son break under the weight of it. The drinking started small. A beer after work, then 2, then a bottle of whiskey hidden in the garage. I'd find evidence of it. Empty cans in the trash, the smell on his breath when he came to pick Elijah up. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't know what to say. My son was drowning, and I couldn't throw him a rope strong enough. By the time Elijah was 7, Darren had become a ghost in his own house. He'd go through the motions, make breakfast, take him to school, help with homework. But the light was gone. The Darren I knew, the one who called me every Sunday, the one who helped his neighbors, he was fading. And then, on a cold January morning, I got a call from the hospital. Massive heart attack, in his sleep, 32 years old. I remember the feeling of my knees buckling, the phone slipping from my hand, the world tilting sideways. I remember thinking that God had made a terrible mistake, that surely they had the wrong person. But they didn't. When I got to the hospital, they told me he'd been dead for hours, alone in his bed, probably hadn't even known it was happening. Elijah was 7 years old, and suddenly he had lost both his parents. And I had lost my son. But standing there in that hospital corridor, watching nurses move past me like I was invisible, I made a decision. Elijah wouldn't lose anyone else. Not on my watch. I would be his mother. I would be his father. I would be whatever he needed me to be. That was the day I buried my son and became a parent all over again.
People talk about sacrifice like it's noble, like it's something you choose and then feel good about yourself for choosing. They don't talk about the real part. The part where you wake up at 4 a.m. because your grandson is having a meltdown about a shirt tag. The part where you work a 12-hour shift and come home to dishes piled in the sink because he's overwhelmed and can't process the idea of cleaning them. The part where you miss your daughter-in-law's funeral because Elijah is having a particularly hard day and you can't leave him. Yes, his mother died. Cancer. 2 years after she abandoned him. A woman I'd never forgiven, but whose death still broke something in me because it meant Elijah would never get the apology he deserved. But life doesn't wait for you to process grief. It just keeps moving. Those early years with Elijah were the hardest years of my life. Harder than nursing through the AIDS crisis. Harder than any loss I'd faced before. He didn't speak. He screamed. He'd lie on the floor in the grocery store because the fluorescent lights were too bright. He'd cover his ears during church because the organ was too loud. He'd eat only specific foods arranged in specific ways. Eggs, toast cut corner to corner, nothing touching on the plate. I learned his language, not through words, but through patterns, through repetition, through learning that when he rocked, he was soothing himself. When he spun in circles, he was regulating his nervous system. When he avoided my eyes, it wasn't rejection, it was overwhelm. We developed rituals. Every morning, I'd make him the same breakfast in the same order. Every evening, we'd sit in the same chair, a worn-out recliner that cost me $30 at a yard sale, and he'd lean against me while I read to him. Not children's books. He didn't care about stories with happy endings. He liked books about patterns, about systems, about the way the world organized itself. I worked as much as I could, picking up extra shifts, but it was never enough. The therapy sessions cost money. The specialized school program cost money. Rent, food, the medications they tried that made him sleep for 14 hours. It all cost money I didn't have. There were nights I'd sit at our kitchen table after Elijah was asleep and just cry. Not from exhaustion, though God knows I was exhausted, but from the weight of knowing that if I failed, if I gave up, this beautiful boy would end up alone in the system, bounced between foster homes, drugged into submission, treated like a problem instead of a person. I couldn't let that happen. So I didn't. Around age 8, something shifted. Elijah discovered computers. I don't remember how. Maybe it was at school. Maybe it was at a library. But suddenly he was obsessed. He'd spend hours staring at the screen, clicking, exploring, teaching himself things I couldn't begin to understand. Other kids played basketball. Elijah fixed broken laptops he found at garage sales. Other kids went to parties. Elijah spent his Saturday nights on YouTube learning how to code. I'd watch him from the kitchen, just this quiet boy, completely absorbed, completely at peace. This was his language. Not English, not the nonverbal communication he'd eventually develop, but logic, systems, code. I remember him being maybe 10 years old, showing me something on the computer screen. "Grandma," he said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact, "I fixed Mr. Henderson's laptop. He gave me $50. $50? Our grocery money for 2 weeks. That's wonderful, sweetheart," I told him. He looked at me with those focused eyes. "Can I help more? Can I fix computers for people?" That's when I understood. He didn't just want to survive. He wanted to contribute. He wanted to matter. I started telling people, "My grandson can fix computers. He's very skilled." Word spread through our small neighborhood. By age 12, Elijah had a waiting list. People would drop off broken devices, and within a few days, he'd have them running better than new. He never asked for much payment, sometimes just a thank you, sometimes a frozen pizza he could eat in his specific way. But what struck me most was this. He was using his mind, the same mind that people had written off as broken, as less than, to solve problems, to help people, to be useful in a world that had told him he never would be. I'd watch him work and feel this fierce pride rise in my chest. Not because he was making money, though that helped, but because he was proving to himself over and over that he was capable, that he mattered, that his autism wasn't his limitation, it was his superpower. I always knew Elijah was smart, But I didn't understand just how smart until he was 17 and casually mentioned he'd gotten a full scholarship to Georgia Tech. I was making dinner. He said it the way someone might mention the weather. "Grandma, I got accepted early admission, full ride. I'm starting in the fall." I dropped the wooden spoon. "Elijah, do you understand what that means?" He nodded, already back to his laptop. "It means I don't need you to worry about tuition. It means I can focus on my project." His project. That's what he'd been calling it for the past 2 years. He wouldn't tell me much about it, just that he was working on something, that it was important, that he thought it could help kids like him. I didn't push. I learned that Elijah shared information when he was ready, not before. When he left for Georgia Tech, I stood in the driveway and watched his car disappear down the street. My grandson, the boy everyone said wouldn't graduate high school, the boy teachers wanted to put in special classrooms, the boy whose own mother couldn't be bothered to love him. He was going to one of the best technical schools in the country. That first year, he called me once a week. Very structured. Tuesday at 7 p.m. He'd tell me about his classes, about his roommate who drove him crazy because he had no respect for personal space, about the dining hall food that he found tolerable but repetitive. And he'd tell me about his project, slowly, piece by piece. "It's an app," he explained one Tuesday, "for communication. A lot of autistic kids, a lot of kids in general, have trouble expressing what they're feeling. They know what they feel, but they can't find the words. The system can't help them because the system doesn't understand them." "So what does your app do?" I asked, sitting in our kitchen, holding the phone like it was made of glass. "It listens, to tone of voice, to facial expressions, to patterns in how they move. Then it offers choices, visual prompts. Not just, are you happy or sad, but real options. It learns from each kid. It gets better at understanding them because it's built to work like an autistic mind works. Logical, detailed, systematic." I understood maybe half of what he was saying, but I understood enough to know he was building something that could matter. By his junior year, he had a working prototype. By senior year, he was getting attention. Tech blogs wrote about him. He did podcast interviews. Investors started calling. And he had this strange calm about it, like success was inevitable, like he always knew this was going to happen. When he turned 22, a major tech company made an offer, $10 million for EchoMind, full acquisition. The night he signed the papers, he video called me. I was at work. I'd never stopped working, even when I didn't have to anymore. And I stepped into a supply closet to take his call. He was at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd had countless meals, where he'd done his homework, where I'd held him through dozens of meltdowns. He said, "We did it, Grandma." Simply. I couldn't speak. I just cried. I'd been a nurse for 40 years. I'd delivered babies. I'd held people's hands while they died. I'd seen life and death and everything in between, but I never felt anything like the pride that flooded through me in that moment. I finally managed. "You did it. My beautiful boy, you did it." He corrected. "We did it, Grandma. I wouldn't be here without you. I wouldn't be here if you'd given up." That night, I thought about all the nights I'd cried at that kitchen table, all the moments I doubted whether I was doing enough, all the times I'd wondered if I was strong enough to be what he needed. Turns out, I was. And Elijah, he was exactly what the world needed. He was exactly what he'd been all along, just waiting for someone to believe in him enough to wait. I didn't know the success that made us proud would also summon the ghost we'd buried years ago. It was a Sunday morning in October, 6 months after the deal was finalized. Elijah was visiting for the weekend, and I was making his breakfast. Eggs, toast cut corner to corner, nothing touching on the plate. The morning was perfect, quiet, peaceful. The kind of morning that felt sacred after years of fighting. I didn't expect the knock. When I opened the door, it took me a full 5 seconds to recognize her. 15 years. 15 years since I'd seen Trina's face. 15 years since she'd walked out of our lives and pretended we didn't exist. She looked expensive now. Her hair was styled in a way that probably required professional maintenance. Her clothes were designer. I could tell by the way they hung, the cost in every seam. Her nails were painted red and perfect. "Martha," she said, and her voice had this honey-dripped quality to it. Fake, calculated. "You look good. You haven't aged much." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was frozen in the doorway like an idiot. "I heard my son did very well for himself," she continued, and she said, "my son," like she had any claim to that title, like she'd earned the right to use those words. Behind her stood a man in a charcoal suit, gray eyes, cold smile, the kind of man who existed in courtrooms in legal documents. "I'm David Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Mrs. Johnson's attorney." Attorney. The word dropped like a stone into water, sending out ripples of dread. I didn't shake his hand. I just stared at Trina, trying to understand what she was doing at my door, dressed like money and carrying lawyers like weapons. "My son and I have some things to discuss," she said smoothly. "Matters of inheritance, family legacy, things that I should have been part of all along." "You don't get to be part of anything," I heard myself say. "You left him. You abandoned him when he was 3 years old." "I was young and confused," she said, and I watched her eyes. They were calculating, empty, completely devoid of genuine remorse. "Surely after all this time we can move past that. I'm his mother. I have rights." "You have no rights." "We'll see what a judge thinks about that," the attorney said quietly. And there it was. The threat, wrapped in a pleasant tone and delivered with a smile. Trina looked over my shoulder, trying to see into the house. "Is Elijah here? I'd love to see him. Reconnect. Family is so important." The audacity. The sheer, breathtaking audacity. When she said, "We'll be in touch," I knew she wasn't here for love. She was here for a claim. I called Elijah into the living room and told him everything. Watching his face, I waited for shock, for anger, for the kind of emotional explosion you'd expect from a young man finding out his abandoned mother had just shown up demanding money. But Elijah just listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react. His hands didn't shake. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "She's predictable. People like her always are. They follow the same pattern. They see success and think they can claim it. They don't understand that some things can't be stolen. They can only be earned." "I'm scared," I admitted. "I'm scared we're going to lose everything." He looked at me with those calm, focused eyes. "We won't," he said simply. "I've been preparing for this since I was old enough to understand what it meant to own something." I didn't know what he meant, but I was about to find out. The papers arrived on a Thursday. I was at work, standing in the supply room restocking linens when my phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Hightower, our attorney. "We need to meet immediately. This is serious." My hands went cold. By that evening, we were sitting in his office. Mr. Hightower was in his 60s, had handled our affairs for years. Nothing complicated, just a will for Elijah, some guardianship paperwork. He was a good man, fair. But when we walked in, I could see the concern etched into his face. "Trina is suing for contested custody and a percentage of Elijah's earnings," he said, sliding papers across the desk. "She's claiming that you isolated her from Elijah, that you manipulated the guardianship arrangement, and that as his biological mother, she has inherent rights to his assets as part of her contribution to his life." Her contribution? Elijah's voice was steady, but I saw his hands tighten on his jeans. "She left when I was 3. "That's what we'll argue," Mr. Hightower said. "But here's what concerns me. Her attorney has filed for a psychological evaluation. They're claiming you may have been emotionally abused or groomed into viewing your mother as an antagonist. They're going to paint Martha as an overbearing caregiver who cut you off from your biological family." I felt like someone had punched me. "That's not true," I whispered. "I know it's not," Mr. Hightower said gently, "but the courts are sympathetic to narratives about reconciliation and family unity, and she has documentation." He pulled out more papers, photographs, letters, bank statements showing she'd tried to send money that had been returned, attempts at contact that had been blocked, therapy records showing she'd sought treatment for abandonment issues. It was all carefully constructed, a paper trail designed to make her look like the victim, the mother who wanted to be part of her son's life but was systematically prevented from doing so. "She's been planning this," Elijah said quietly. "For how long?" "Months, maybe years. She needed to establish a pattern. She needed receipts." Mr. Hightower nodded. "He's right. This isn't impulsive. This is calculated. And that's what worries me. Calculated cases are harder to win because there's no emotional explosion, no obvious villainy. Just a woman who, on paper, looks like she made mistakes but wants to reconcile with her son." "What are the chances?" Elijah asked. Mr. Hightower was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, it depends on the judge. If we get someone sympathetic to parental rights, we might lose a significant portion. If we get someone focused on the child's well-being and establish guardianship, we have a better shot. But Martha, I need to be direct with you." He looked at me, and I could see the concern etched into his face. "We might lose this one." Those words, I'll never forget them. Elijah reached over and took my hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "What happens if we lose?" he asked. "If the judge rules in her favor, she could gain partial custody, though you're of age, so that's less of an issue, but more likely she'd win a percentage of your current assets and ongoing earnings. We're talking potentially millions." The room started spinning. All those years, all that work, all of it, potentially handed over to someone who hadn't earned a single moment of it. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the house settle around me, and I prayed. I'm not a religious woman. Life teaches you not to rely on God, but I prayed anyway. I went into Elijah's room around 2 a.m. He was still awake, laptop glowing in the darkness. "I'm sorry," I told him. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you better. I'm sorry." "Grandma, stop. You've protected me my entire life. You've been the only constant I've ever had. Do you really think I'd let someone take that away now? What can we do?" He was quiet for a moment, fingers still moving across the keyboard. "We can let her dig her own grave," he said finally. "People like her always do. They just need enough rope." I didn't understand what he meant, but I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe that somehow, despite everything, we were going to be okay. So I chose to trust him. Even when the fear was screaming at me to panic, even when every logical part of my brain was telling me we were about to lose everything.
The courthouse was packed. I don't know how word got out, but somehow the media had caught wind of the story. Millionaire autistic tech founder in custody battle with estranged mother. The headlines were sensational, designed to make people click, designed to reduce Elijah to a headline and Trina to a redemption arc. Reporters with cameras lined the hallway. People whispered as we walked past. I held Elijah's hand, and he squeezed once, a signal that meant he was okay, that he'd prepared for this. The judge was a woman in her 70s, stern-faced, with reading glasses on a chain. Judge Patricia Caldwell.
the kind of judge who'd probably seen it all and trusted nothing. Trina walked in wearing a cream-colored dress, modest, understated. She'd hired a stylist, I could tell. Everything about her appearance was designed to communicate humility and vulnerability. Her hair was down, softer than I'd ever seen it. When she took the stand, she'd even had tears in her eyes. Her attorney was a smooth talker named Richard Kensington. He'd won cases like this before. I Googled him the night before, terrified and sleepless. He knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. "Mrs. Johnson," he began gently, "tell the court how you felt when you realized your son had become successful." "I was shocked," Trina said softly, "and ashamed that I hadn't been there to see it happen, ashamed of the choices I'd made when I was young and confused." "You left your son when he was 3 years old. Can you explain what led to that decision?" Trina's eyes got watery. "I was experiencing severe postpartum depression. I didn't have support. I didn't understand what was happening to me. I felt like I was drowning, and everyone, especially Martha, made me feel like I was a terrible person for struggling." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. I felt my chest tighten with rage. "Martha isolated me," Trina continued. "She made me feel like I couldn't be a good mother. She made it seem like Elijah was better off without me. And I was weak. I believed her." My attorney, a sharp woman named Susan Kim, leaned over and whispered, "Don't react. Let her keep talking." Kensington walked through his narrative carefully. Trina painted herself as a victim of circumstance and Martha's manipulation. She talked about trying to reach out over the years, about wanting reconciliation, but being blocked. She presented her documentation, the return letters, the rejected attempts at contact, the therapy records. It was a masterclass in manipulation dressed up as vulnerability. Judge Caldwell took notes, her expression unreadable. Then Susan stood up for cross-examination. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, her voice sharp as a blade, "when you left your son in 2008, you signed a legal document relinquishing parental rights. Do you recall that?" Trina hesitated. "I was confused. I didn't understand what I was signing." "You were confused about relinquishing your rights to your child." "Yes, I was. Did you read the document before signing?" Martha was pressuring me. "Yes or no?" The courtroom was silent. You could hear someone's phone vibrate 3 rows back. "No," she whispered. "Thank you. Now, regarding the letters you attempted to send, your attorney claims they were returned. Do you have tracking information showing these letters were ever actually mailed?" Trina's face paled. They were with my attorney." "Which is interesting because you didn't contact your son directly. You had your attorney contact him. All attempts were made through legal channels, not through personal outreach. Is that correct?" "I wanted to be respectful." "You wanted to establish a legal paper trail. That's different, isn't it?" Susan was surgical. She dismantled Trina's narrative piece by piece. The therapy records were from last year after she had found out about the money. The documentation of her attempts to contact Elijah showed she never actually tried to speak to him directly. Everything was mediated, lawyered, calculated. But the real blow came when Susan said, "Your Honor, I'd like to present a video clip from social media." The courtroom filled with the sound of music and laughter. It was Trina on a yacht, champagne glass raised, surrounded by friends. "Oh my God, girl, you look so happy," one of her friends said off camera. She laughed, that same hollow laugh I remembered from years ago. "I am happy. And you know what? If my ex's kid ever made real money, like serious money, I'm gonna come collect what I'm owed. Blood's blood, right? He owes me 15 years of child support at least." The courtroom erupted. Her face went white. Her attorney was making frantic notes, but it was too late. The video was 6 months old, posted publicly, shared thousands of times. She'd confessed her entire plan on camera, and nobody had bothered to hide it. Judge Caldwell leaned back in her chair, removing her glasses. This case is becoming clearer.
I thought it was over. I thought Susan had won. I was already thinking about what it would feel like to breathe again, to stop being terrified, to... Then Elijah stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and steady, "may I say something?" Judge Caldwell looked surprised. "You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Johnson. Your attorney can speak for you." "I know," Elijah said, "but I think it's important that I speak for myself." He walked to the front of the courtroom. He wasn't nervous. There was no tremor in his hands, no hesitation in his step. This was a boy who'd spent his entire life observing, analyzing, preparing. This was his moment. "I don't remember my mother," he began. "I was 3 when she left. Most of my memories from before age 5 are gone. But I remember my grandmother. I remember the yellow cup she used to give me juice in. I remember sitting in a recliner with her arm around me while she read to me. I remember the specific way she said my name when she was proud of me." He paused, letting that sink in. "I don't have memories of abandonment. I have memories of consistency, of someone who showed up every single day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard." Trina was staring at the table, unable to look at him. "This app I built, EchoMind, it was designed to help children communicate with people who don't understand them. It was designed because I know what it feels like to be misunderstood, to be seen as a problem instead of a person. My grandmother never made me feel that way, not once." He pulled a folder from his jacket. "Your Honor, I'd like to present the original guardianship documents from 2008. These show that my mother voluntarily relinquished all parental rights and that my grandmother was granted full legal custody." He handed it to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. Judge Caldwell adjusted her glasses and read. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten slightly. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, looking at Trina, "is this your signature?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. I don't remember." "Your Honor," Elijah said quietly, "that document was notarized. There were witnesses. It was filed with the court. My mother didn't just abandon me. She legally surrendered her rights to me. She made a choice, and I think she only came back when she heard I had money." The courtroom was absolutely silent. "I have money because my grandmother believed in me when nobody else did. She sacrificed everything, her time, her energy, her own life for me. And now my mother wants a share of something she didn't build, something she didn't earn, something she actively rejected when it came with the responsibility of actually being a mother." Elijah looked directly at Trina, and I saw her flinch. "You were right about one thing. You did hurt me. Not by leaving, I don't have memories of that to hurt from, but by coming back and proving that you never cared. You just saw a number. You saw money. And that's something I can never unsee." He turned back to the judge. "I ask that you dismiss this case. My grandmother is my mother. She always has been, and I'm not going to let anyone take that away or diminish it." Then he walked back to his seat. Judge Caldwell was quiet for a long moment. She looked at Trina, then at the documents, then back at the video playing silently on the screen. "Case dismissed." She brought the gavel down, "with prejudice." The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed. People shouted. But I wasn't watching any of it. I was watching Elijah, tears streaming down his face, finally letting himself feel what he'd been holding in for 15 years.
We didn't go home right away. We sat in Susan's office while she explained the implications of the judgment. With prejudice meant Trina couldn't appeal. She couldn't try again. It was over. "She might try to contact you separately," Susan warned. "Emotionally, not legally.
Be prepared for that." Elijah just nodded. When we finally got home, I made tea. Real tea, not the herbal stuff I usually drink. And we just sat together in the kitchen. The same kitchen where we'd had countless meals, where he'd learned to read, where I'd taught him about the world. "How did you know?" I asked him. "How did you know she'd show up?" I didn't know for certain, but I understood the pattern. Successful people attract people looking for a share of that success. My mother was always transactional, always measuring people by what they could give her. Once I had money, I became valuable to her again. "But the documents," I said, "you had them ready. You knew exactly what to present." He smiled faintly. "I've been preparing since I was 15. After Dad died, I realized that legal documentation is everything. Feelings matter, but papers matter more. So I organized everything, made copies, had it all certified and ready, just in case." "You were so young," I whispered. "I had to be," he said simply. "I couldn't lose you, and I knew someday she'd come looking for what she thought was hers." I reached across the table and took his hand. His hands were still warm from holding the coffee mug, and I realized how rare it was for him to let me touch him unprompted, how much trust that represented. "I'm sorry," I told him. "For what?" "For not being able to protect you from her completely. For not being able to erase the fact that she existed, that she chose to leave." Elijah looked at me with those calm, focused eyes. "You did protect me. By being consistent, by showing up, by loving me when loving me was hard. That's protection, Grandma. That's everything." A week later, Trina sent a letter. It was simple, a card with a handwritten note inside. It said, "I'm sorry. Maybe we can start over? I'd like to know my son." Elijah read it. Then he walked to the sink and tore it into pieces. He let the paper fall into the trash. "No," he said quietly. "Some things can't be repaired." Then he turned to me and asked, "What's for dinner?" And we moved forward, because that's what we'd always done. We moved forward together, the two of us, against the world, unbreakable.
3 months later, everything changed again. A journalist named Rebecca Chen reached out to Elijah. She wanted to do a feature on him. Young tech genius overcomes adversity. The kind of story that sells newspapers and gets clicks. Elijah agreed, but with conditions. He wanted the full truth told, not a sanitized version. The real story. Rebecca was thorough. She interviewed me. She interviewed Elijah's teachers from middle school. She looked at court records, public documents, everything she could find. And in doing that research, she discovered something. Trina had tried to sell exclusive rights to EchoMind to an overseas tech company. She'd used forged documents claiming she was Elijah's official manager and could grant those rights. She'd created fake contracts, fake letterhead, everything designed to make the sale look legitimate. The only reason she hadn't succeeded was because the company had done their due diligence and discovered the documents were fraudulent. Rebecca took that information to the FBI. Within a month, Trina was arrested. The charges were fraud, attempted theft of intellectual property, and forgery. When the story broke, it was everywhere. Estranged mother arrested for attempting to steal autistic son's $1 million app. The narrative had completely flipped. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a criminal. I thought Elijah would be angry. I thought he'd feel vindicated, might take some satisfaction in her downfall. Instead, when I asked him how he felt, he just said, "Sad. She could have had a relationship with me. She could have been part of my life. Instead, she chose to be a stranger with a claim. And now she's in legal trouble because of it." "Is that her fault or ours?" I asked. "Her fault," he said without hesitation. "I gave her multiple opportunities to be honest. She chose dishonesty every time. I just didn't stop her from experiencing the consequences." That's when I truly understood my grandson. He wasn't vindictive. He wasn't cruel. He was simply logical. People make choices. Choices have consequences. You can't save someone from their own decisions. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone face what they've created. I'm 68 years old now. I'm still working. I cut back to part-time, but I still go to the hospital twice a week. Old habits die hard, and honestly, I need the work. Keeps me sharp. Elijah's doing incredible things. Echo Mind has helped over 100,000 children. He started a foundation for single grandparents raising autistic children. He's living his life quietly, methodically, always thinking several steps ahead. But here's what I want you to know, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from. Comment down below and tell me, where are you watching from right now? Are you watching because you're a grandmother, like me? Are you watching because you're autistic, or you know someone who is? Are you watching because you've been abandoned, betrayed, left behind? Because if you are, I want you to hear this. The people who stay matter more than the people who come back for what they left behind. Trina came back, and she nearly destroyed everything. But she couldn't, because Elijah had something stronger than money or legal claims. He had consistency. He had someone who showed up every single day and chose him, over and over again. You can't claim the fruit of a tree you refuse to water. That's the truth I've learned in 68 years of living. That's what I want you to remember. If you loved this story, and I really hope you did, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Also, download your ebook titled Suspense and Thriller Stories by clicking the link in the pinned comment below. It's free, and it's full of stories just like this one. And before you go, remember this. Love the ones who stay, not the ones who come back for what they left behind. Thank you for listening to my story. From my heart to yours.